Thanks.
I approve of the message. I'm not a book minimalist.
That's right. Okay, I think we're good. I don't need to open the light behind me to turn it on because I think it would be we would have the same problem.
Yes, exactly. This is fine. I think this works well.
Let me just check the distance. Yeah, great.
So when I start the program, I will talk as if it's going to be a Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Um, I have to check whether this episode will air next week or the week after, but it's going to be a Tuesday night at 9 p.m. and I will send you the YouTube link. So what I'll do is I introduce the program and then I'll introduce you and ask you a couple of questions about your professional background, just to connect you with the audience. The audience is very diverse, international, so I usually start with kind of simpler questions to make people understand what is going on in case they haven't been following the situation, and then we will go more in depth in and touch on the themes that I mentioned, if that works for you.
So we begin with the with Turkey blocking Sweden and Finland,
Yes, yes.
and then okay.
And
Uh,
we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about the context of Turkey-Russia relationships, especially in light of the war in Ukraine and the role Turkey has been trying to play in why all of that is much more complex than meets the eye. I think most people are not familiar with the extent of Turkey and Russia cooperation on energy, on
yeah,
banking issues, on the currency situation, and what impact it has on the international sanctions effort, and what that means for Syria and for the Mediterranean and Turkey's geopolitical agenda.
great.
Good evening. Welcome back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman. I am the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. Today's topic is fraught with nuance and controversy. Turkey's dance macabre with Russia is a topic that is poorly understood in light of the complexities of what's going on and poor coverage of some of the underlying issues. To deal with whether Turkey and Russia are enemies, allies, frenemies, or something else, depending on the situation, we have with us Dr. Ioannis Kotoulas. He's a geopolitical analyst, a foreign policy expert, and most recently a co-author of a book on the geopolitics of the war in Ukraine, a very relevant subject, directly pertinent to the relationship between Turkey and Russia and the impact globally and on the Mediterranean in particular. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we delve into the program, could you tell us a little bit about your professional background for our audience?
Good evening, Mrs. Zuckerman, and to all our viewers worldwide. I am a lecturer in geopolitics at the University of Athens in Greece. My areas of expertise are the Mediterranean, modern history of Greece and foreign policy of European states, and geopolitics, theory of geopolitics. I have written a recent monograph, The Geopolitics of the War in Ukraine, published by Foreign Affairs Institute. It is downloadable. You can find it at the if you search it with the terms, or at the website of the Foreign Affairs Institute. And currently, I'm also preparing an extended monograph on the war in Ukraine. I'm trying to locate the real historical and geopolitical background. I have a PhD in history, in modern history, and a second PhD in geopolitics. I am prominently historian. This is my main theoretical and scientific academic background. And also a second PhD in international relations and geopolitics.
That is incredibly impressive and more than qualifying. And in light of your expertise in history, actually, before I start with the current events and the current tensions and relations between Turkey, Russia, and other states, let's go back in time, because Russia-Turkey relations have been complicated historically, to say the least. And if you could give us a little bit of a refresher about the roots of today's concerns in Russia's and Turkey's historical geopolitical agendas, that would be great.
Yes, these two are historical states and historical factors that have been parts of empires, and this is essential to understand their perception of international relations. Russia was an empire since the 17th century. It was an empire in an altered form as the Soviet Union. And it still, and to date, wishes to revive a sort of new empire with its invasion of Ukraine. Turkey, on the other side, was part of the Ottoman Empire, and today their perception is still that of an expansionist force in the region, in its periphery, but also not only the Mediterranean, but also in the Middle East. That is the new vision of foreign policy of the Erdogan regime. It does not perceive Turkey as a member of the West, as the Kemalists before did. The Erdogan regime thinks that Turkey should be a force of its own, like a bridge between the West and the Islamic world, but it tries to keep a balance with its NATO membership and with Russia. Since 2016, the two countries, Turkey and Russia, have been in an excellent relationship. Before, it was a typical relationship, but since 2016, these two countries have come really close. And the effect of this strange situation with Turkey and Russia being actually geopolitical bedfellows is that Turkey purchased S-400. These are anti-aircraft advanced Russian weapon systems. And this was the reason why the US decided to expel Turkey from its F-35 program. F-35s are the most advanced fighter multi-role jets currently, and Turkey had agreed with the US, with Lockheed Martin, to obtain 100 F-35s. As you can understand, Ms. Zuckerman, this would make Turkey a formidable air power. But due to their agreement with the Russians, they have S-400 in Turkey. This is a violation of NATO rules. If you are in NATO, you cannot play both sides. You cannot obtain weapon systems from other countries, and especially from Russia, because there are problems of confidentiality, of perhaps leaking NATO technology to Russia, or incompatibility of weapon systems. This is why Turkey was expelled from the F-35 program back in 2019 from the previous administration, the Trump administration, and it's still under sanctions, limited but effective sanctions by the US. I mean that the US is not upgrading another fighter jet of Turkey, the F-16s. These are the most advanced type, excluding, of course, the F-35. So Turkey wanted to upgrade this to the latest version and obtain some additional 40 aircrafts, F-16s, not F-35. This case is closed by now. So the US is blocking this one option also. And just a few days before, President Biden wants to move forward with granting Turkey these F-16s as a gift, let's say, for if Turkey decides to lift its veto over Sweden and Finland joining NATO. Officially, of course, Biden says this is not a quid pro quo. The one thing has nothing to do, with the other, but everybody knows that this is the real reason. So the relations between Russia and Turkey have been ambivalent because these two, in the historical past, because these two were have been both enemies and friends. When there was the Ottoman Empire, the Russian Empire was at odds with the Ottoman Empire over control of the Black Sea, or when Russia attempted to appear as the protector of Christian populations from the 18th century until the middle of the 19th century. There was a balance, but other times Turkey was essential for Soviet or Russian security. Why? Because Turkey controls the Bosporus Straits, leading from the Mediterranean Sea to the Black Sea. This is essential for Russian security because no warships can enter the Black Sea and, attack perhaps or project power against Russia from the Black Sea. And it is interesting on historical level that Russia was attacked twice two times in the past by the Western sea powers. In geopolitics, we make this distinction between land powers. Russia is a land power, Germany is a land power, that is states that base their military power on land forces, and sea powers. Of course, now today with technologies like aeronautical powers, both with air power, the US is a sea power on a typological level. Great Britain, that is states that can project power worldwide due to their control of seas, sea lanes, sea routes. So twice in the past, Russia was attacked in the 19th century during the Crimean War. You had Western sea powers going to Crimea, landing, and with their superior technology, defeating the Russians. And you had in 1919, when there was the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, you had the Allied intervention against the Bolsheviks. That failed, but you had the same typology, the same events. So this region is essential. It's like a sensitive point of security for Russia. Today, the relations between these two countries are very good because there is a reorientation of Turkey. This is why. With the Erdogan regime, Turkey has changed its policy, and from being a, let's say, faithful Western member of the Western Alliance or a NATO member and an ally of the US, it has adopted a new strategy, trying to keep a balance between the US and Russia, but actually helping Russia a lot. And this occurs on economical level, on financial level, on a strategic level, on many levels, and even today with the war in Ukraine.
Now, sorry, go ahead.
And so we see this, right now with the war in Ukraine, what is happening. You have all NATO members sending weapons to Ukraine. Every NATO member, Greece, Belgium, everybody has sent something. Turkey has not sent any weapons to assist Ukraine, but of course it has sold its technology, its drone technology. It has advanced drone technology, the Bayraktar drones. It has sold these drones to Ukraine. So they keep the balance, They sell these drones to assist Ukraine. But on the other side, they assist Russia with helping Russia evade the sanctions that the EU especially has imposed. The EU has imposed so far 9 packages of heavy sanctions on the Russian economy. They are working not so fast as perhaps as the EU had hoped, but they are working on a mid-term and long-term level, causing considerable damage to Russian economy. And Turkey is helping Russia evade these sanctions by providing shelter for Russian companies with investments. There are many Russians that are not in any form of sanctions in Turkish territory. So Turkey, in essence, in general, is trying to play both sides. Effectively, it's like the Trojan horse of Russia in NATO. And as you know, there are even voices that I think former National Security Advisor Bolton suggested that Turkey should be kicked out of NATO. And there are even some other voices. I read recently an article from a columnist that Turkish membership should be suspended in NATO, both with Hungary, another state with problematic behavior. So you have this situation. It's like a tango, you know. Everybody knows that Turkey is helping Russia, but it's important also for Western interests, because the US does not want to give away, let's say, Turkey to Russian influence. It's still not prepared to do that. So it's a kind of a chicken game, if I could say, between the US mainly and Turkey, who will be the one to accept the demands of the other. And especially now with NATO, we have this great problem. Turkey is blocking the entrance of Sweden and Finland in NATO. And this is a great problem. Of course, these are different cases for Turkey. These are highly advanced technological states, and their inclusion into NATO is a real problem for Russia, because Sweden, especially Sweden, produces a lot of weapons. It has an advanced aircraft industry. Finland they have compatible armies. It's not like the inclusion of small states like Albania or Montenegro that didn't make any tangible difference. These are states whose armies are already ready to be NATO compatible. Finland controls the outlet of St. Petersburg of Russia, the Gulf of Finland. So Russia obtains an additional front, additional border with NATO, extending from the White Sea, from the Arctic Ocean, and from Norway, Finland, up to the Black Sea with Romania and, of course, Turkey, which keeps the balance. So this is the real issue, whether Turkey shall accept Sweden and Finland right now as NATO members.
Now, it's easy to understand why Russia would want to weaken NATO by approaching Turkey and causing problems for the West. Why would Turkey, though, want to give up the leverage that it had, the participation in F-35 and so forth, for the purchase of the S-400, which at the time of the purchase were not battle-tested anyway and could have been potentially inferior to the American defense systems?
Yes, back in 2019, there were warnings by the US to the Turks: do not buy S-400 because there shall be sanctions. Perhaps the Turkish side thought that the US would not fulfill their, let's say, not their threats, anyway, their warnings, because in the past, the US would say one thing and actually, then do another. But now things have gotten serious worldwide. So states and leading powers like the US are not ready, they mean business now. So all their warnings are to be taken seriously, and especially with Russia, with all this tension that has resurfaced with the invasion. Now everything is, let's say, Russia related. So the behavior of states like Turkey or other NATO members is dependent on their relation with Russia. You can have it both ways. That's the message from Washington. And Turkey is trying to play, both sides. Biden tries to keep a balance he would prefer to give Turkey F-16s to keep them, let's say, aligned. But the Congress is blocking it. So far, you have Senator Menendez from New Jersey, who is head of the Foreign Affairs, he's chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Congress. He's blocking because on various reasons, of course, this special relationship of Turkey with Russia, but also for reasons of Turkey being a non-democratic regime internally. There is much oppression in Turkey right now. Hundreds of thousands, and I mean it literally, hundreds of thousands of people are in jail in Turkey. Opposition figures, Gulenists, for your viewers. You know, Gulenism is a sort of Islamic movement. It's like centered around Gulen, who is a figure, a cleric, a theologian of Islam, who is currently living in Pennsylvania. He has found sanctuary in the US. These are, let's say, quietist. Let's describe it as kind of quietist, moderate, Islamic-centered view of society. They condemn terrorism and stuff, but they want a sort of revival of Islamic values in society. I would compare them like, you know, Christian movements like the Amish or the Old Order. There are such Old Order, the Amish and other groups in the US and Canada. Some sort of quietist, religion-centered values. These people, anyway, were furiously persecuted in Turkey. Hundreds and tens of thousands of them have fled to the West, to Greece, to Sweden, and I will come back to that, to all over Europe. So, and you know, Turkey is branding all these people as terrorists. They say that they call this FETÖ. You shall see these 4 letters, FETÖ. FETÖ is the name of this group, and they perceive them as terrorists, and they issue wanted lists. Turkey has given all its embassies all over Europe and the West, you know, booklets with photos saying we want these guys. They are, you know, let's say in France, this person and that person reside in France, and they are wanted by Turkish authorities for being terrorists. And of course, this charge of terrorism is related to the 2016 coup in Turkey that Turkey blames actually the US. They think that the US was behind this strange incident. You had a half-hearted coup by a part of the army against the Erdogan regime. It utterly failed. There are some sources, of course, we cannot verify this, that Russia helped Erdogan. They actually, you know, they spread the news. They warned Erdogan that there was going to be a coup, and this is why Erdogan felt the need then to improve drastically his relations with Russia. There is this unverified information, but it could be real that the FSB, the Russian Secret Service, warned Turkey about the Turkish regime about the coup, and therefore there is this close cooperation. And this close cooperation extends on, as I told you earlier, on energy. Turkey is building 2 nuclear power plants with Russian experts. Russians are building them for Turkey. They have the S-400 that we mentioned, and which is a total red line for the US. They have this, and they have this active. They also have a regular cooperation in security and information. All of these are really strong signs that Turkey undermines the Western alliance. But as I told you, it's a kind of so far it's not easy to let's say there is no clause in NATO to kick out a member that acts this way. This is strange, but NATO was founded when it was founded back in 1949, and when Turkey, along with Greece, became members in 1952, nobody thought that NATO members would act this way, would keep a strange relationship with Russia. So there was no provision for expelling NATO members. It was self-evident that everybody would act as a faithful NATO member. And back then, back in the 1950s, and up until AKP, that is Erdogan's party, took over in 2002, for a period of 50 years, Turkey was, let's say, a faithful Western ally. It was acting according to US guidelines, let's say. This changed in 2003 when the US and the other powers invaded Iraq. This was the first time that Turkey did not want any invasion of Iraq. Why? Because Turkey was afraid that if Iraq was destroyed or moved along some sort of confederate structure, the Kurdish element would obtain power, and this is a nightmare for Turkey. Turkey perceives the Kurdish problem as existential. This is why it's so fiercely opposed to any Kurdish activity, and this is related to its veto over Sweden, because in Sweden there are many Kurds living there and many Turkish opposition figures, and Turkey has asked specifically for with lists with names that these persons should be extradited to Turkey. Of course, if they are extradited to Turkey, they could even face a death penalty, or they could even face a maximum life prison sentences to life, because in Turkey they are perceived as terrorists. So this is Sweden so far has extradited a few persons, but it's not willing, to bow to every demand that Erdogan is making, because Turkey has this pattern of state behavior. If you give in to a demand, then they will go for more. And let me just share the experience of Greece. Okay, I'm Greek. Of course, I'm subjective to a degree, but for 50 years, Greece, since 1973, has been under constant Turkish aggression. They do not accept that year, 1973, they began to not accept our right to drill for oil in the Aegean Sea. The next year, in 1974, they invaded Cyprus, another state with an ethnic Greek majority. So far, still, Cyprus, the northern part, is under Turkish occupation. Of course, nobody's talking about this because Cyprus does not have any oil like Kuwait. It's not so strategically important for the West, but still you have Nicosia, the capital of Cyprus, divided. It's the last European capital that is divided. You have Turkish troops, 40,000 Turkish troops stationed in the north of Cyprus. It's an island under occupation. Then they continue to make, they have a casus belli. Casus belli is when a country threatens another country with war if it does an action. So they officially threaten Greece with a casus belli, with war, since 1995. If Greece decides to extend its territorial waters in the Aegean Sea from 6 nautical miles to 12 nautical miles. According to the law of the sea, every state has the right to extend its nautical miles up to 12. If it's a closed sea, like the Aegean Sea or the Mediterranean in general. If you are the US, you have the right to extend it up to 200 nautical miles, and Turkey has issued this casus belli, this threat of war against Greece, and this is illegal under international law. The Charter of the United Nations says that a state cannot threaten another state with war because, this is uncivilized behavior. You cannot have this for everything that you do not like, threaten the other state with war. And of course, there is this continuous tension. Imagine that every day, and I mean it literally, every single day, Turkish aircraft fly over Greek national airspace. Imagine having another country flying over US airspace every single day. That would be quite irritating. This is an issue. Turkey is aggressive against another fellow NATO member because Greece and Turkey are both NATO members. So you have aggression of Turkey against a fellow NATO member, Greece. You have Turkey cooperating with Russia on multiple fronts. Turkey making incursions into Syria, and they're cooperating with Russia also, because Russians are there since 2015. And, trying to appear as this kind of regional hegemonic power on multiple fronts. So I would say that Turkey is over-ambitious, and it causes considerable problems to the Western security architecture.
So we are seeing that Turkey has very successfully positioned itself to be perceived as a difficult but indispensable player. For instance, in terms of the war in Ukraine, it negotiated the grain deal with Russia that allows the passage of grain externally amidst the international food insecurity resulting from this conflict. And we're also seeing that it has also blocked Russian warships, making the passage to Syria significantly more complicated. At the same time, we're seeing this financial and very self-serving activity. So on the one hand, diplomatically, militarily, it's still playing an important role. On the other hand, it's kind of undermining everything and helping prolong the conflict. So what is the best deal with such a scenario when a country is geographically located in a way that it can project power, when it has the military might to be, a significant player, because Turkey has its own defense industry as well, and its sale of technology to Ukraine has been, especially in the early stages before the Western help arrived, particularly important. But at the same time, it's basically a spy for Russia inside the NATO. It can share intelligence, it can share sensitive information, thus undermining all the efforts. What can be done to limit the damage and while taking advantage of the upsides?
You have made excellent remarks that describe, Turkey's behavior. To be just, Turkey has done for itself, has adopted a right strategy of, creating an important army. Other European states have not adopted this kind of attitude, and therefore they need Turkey. Take Germany, for example. In NATO, you need to spend at least 2% of your national product, gross national product, on defense. This is a provision by NATO, so that each state has a minimum of defense capabilities, to contribute to the whole of the alliance. So you have ultra-rich states like Germany or Belgium or the Netherlands or even France paying only 1.2 of their budget. And you have states like Greece, and the US, of course, is well above. It's like 3%. And Greece is also now, because it has this threat from Turkey, is like 3 or 4%. So if you have a vacuum, others will fill it. So Turkey has filled this vacuum of the unwillingness of European powers to be military able to project power. The only states in NATO that have considerable military power, okay, you have Italy, you have Spain, you have Poland, which is very important. You have Greece, which has the third strongest air force, and you have Turkey, of course. Other states, not so much. So, in a way, Turkey has played cleverly this card, this army card. So, what can be done to, counter, let's say, this behavior of Turkey? Because in order to be credible, a defensive military alliance like NATO, it requires a sort of a framework of common confidence of its members. And this confidence emanates from the fact that they all share the same values and the same perception of external threats, who is an enemy and who is not. So Turkey, by its obstruction of Finland and Sweden, these two countries, for our viewers to have this in context, they made they applied to become NATO members in May. So there are, how much? It's like 6 months now, and still Sweden and Finland have not become members because this application needs to be ratified by all 30 NATO members from the parliaments. So far, all members have ratified except Hungary and Turkey. Hungary, okay, keeps also a balance with Russia, with the Orban regime, because it's dependent on gas, and it wants to, counterbalance pressure from Brussels. And I have to say that sometimes this centralist tendency by Brussels is really negative, because EU is useful, but for many of us that are members of the EU, it's not that we want EU to be a supra-state. We would like to be just a financial union, but sometimes the EU, I mean, especially the European Commission, tries to move in a more centralist direction, even dictating everyday life facts, how you should what kind of energy you should use, what kind of, it's going too far. And this is something that Russia has taken advantage of, because Russia is counting on these anti-EU movements, and to a degree these anti-EU movements have right in some of their views, because, as I told you, the EU sometimes it's trying to abolish the autonomy of each state, and these forces take advantage of this. So you have Turkey actually undermining now the NATO alliance, and as I told you before, there is this problem that you can't expel a NATO member, but you could. I read recently an article at the Washington Examiner. You could actually suspend their membership. It's like, a temporary kind of freeze, let's say, a suspension. And this could work because there are some clauses of NATO, of the charter of NATO, that provide that that say that all members, all member states should adopt some measures. For example, Article 2 says that all members should contribute towards the development of peaceful and friendly international relations by mind this issue, by strengthening their free institutions. That is, you have to be a democracy, because NATO was founded as an alliance of democracies against the communist regime, against the communist Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. So you have to be yourself a republic, a free state. So when Turkey has this oppressive regime, authoritarian regime, it actually violates this article with its persecution of not only political opponents like the Gulenists. Turkey's regime oppresses Kurds. Kurdish people make up about 20% of Turkish state, but their language is oppressed. They do not have. There is a let's describe this as a pro-Kurdish or pro-minority party, HDP in Turkey, and currently there is an attempt to ban it from taking part in the elections. This party has its electoral influence is about 12% now. Turkey has a limit, 10% limit to enter the parliament, and this has been done especially to target the Kurds, so that the Kurdish population would not enter the parliament. So this is why this limit is so high. It's 10% in Turkey. In other states, in Greece, it's 3%. To enter the parliament, you have to win 3% of the votes. In Germany, it's like 5%. In Turkey, it's 10% because they want to not allow the Kurds to be part of the political process. So you have oppression of the Kurdish language, oppression of religious minorities like the Alevis. These are, divergent religious Sunni and Sufist, kind of mystical groups, Islamic, but they are persecuted. You have also persecution of Christians in Turkey, Orthodox Christians like the Greeks or other Protestants. There is this general atmosphere, the general milieu of an authoritarian regime. So all these dimensions, violate some guiding principles of NATO, because I repeat, NATO was founded as a coalition of Western democracies opposing the communist totalitarian regimes. There is also another article of the NATO treaty. It says that Article 8, that a member state should not undertake any international engagement. It's rather vague, but it says that it should not enter into any international engagement that is in conflict with the text of the treaty. It's rather vague, but what it means is that you can have it both ways. You can have an international relation with Russia. This is the meaning, the real meaning. You can't have a relation that undermines the very mission of NATO, of its establishment. This is Article 8. And we could say that Turkey has broken this pledge with when it bought the S-400 system, and when on an ideological level, it has broke this pledge when it demands that Sweden abandon its free speech laws. The constitution of Sweden. Sweden is like the US. It has a total free speech clause. Other European states not so much. In Sweden, you had this incident. Of course, it's ambivalent. You had some Danish guys from an extremist party burning the Quran, but it's permissible to do that in Sweden. In France or in other states, you couldn't do that because it could be considered an attack on religious symbols. Anyway, what Erdogan wants is that Sweden submits to his will to give Kurds that Turkey perceives terrorists, and not only, but also Turkish anti-regime people that they have found sanctuary in Sweden, and they are critical of the Erdogan regime. And of course, Erdogan wants this to be, arrested and brought to Turkey. And this is not a demand you can make on a republic. This is an intrusion into internal politics. This is forbidden under international law. You cannot interfere and say and dictate to a country what it should do internally. Okay, you can talk about bilateral relations, you can avoid some points of conflict, but Turkey cannot dictate to Sweden or to Finland what they should do with their citizens, because some of these Kurds living in Sweden are Swedish citizens now. They have, been naturalized. So there is this problem. I don't think that Turkey will accept both Sweden, either Sweden or Finland, in NATO before the elections. They have elections in Turkey in May 14. So until then, for political reasons, Erdogan will not seem to deviate from his hard talk. And of course, opposition in Turkey is no different. You have the Kemalist CHP, and then you have, which is the second, let's say, largest party. These are nationalists too. You have the EE party, meaning good party, which is a split off from the MHP, the fourth party, which are the Grey Wolves. The Grey Wolves are a notorious, actually terrorist organization. It's an ultra-nationalist organization founded back in the Cold War period in Turkey. And they have been involved in multiple attacks, not only in Turkey, against their political opponents, against Kurds, against Greeks. They participated also in the murder of a Greek Cypriot in Cyprus. They have been involved in incidents in Europe because there are many Turkish communities, migrant communities in Europe, and they are involved in attacks against Kurds, against other Turks that they disagree. And in France, they have been, and other countries, they have been labeled a terrorist organization, the Grey Wolves. In Turkey, they are part of this party, this MHP, which is fourth, let's say, in electoral influence, ranking there. And from this party, you have a split off, this EE party, EE Party C, meaning good party, which is currently it ranks third with perceived influence of approximately 15 to 20%. I think Erdogan will win probably because he controls all media, he controls state budgets, and he can, give money to the people. He can use a kind of socialist policy to influence people with giving. I think just a week or so previously, he told that he would raise pensions. And, this is a great incentive for older people. He would raise considerably pensions, and he would reduce the limits, the age limits to go to when you go out to pension. So he controls media. He controls the economy. The economy of Turkey is dependent to a great degree to the economy of Russia. They are intertwined. Both states need each other. At the same time, they're trying to obtain F-16s from the US. They're playing a very dangerous game. So to conclude my remarks on this section, you asked me what could be done. Officially, you cannot expel a NATO member. Perhaps, but de facto, practically, you could suspend its membership, or you could not invite them. What do I mean? If you had a NATO member that has this kind of behavior helping Russia, you could have a NATO summit, and then you would say, okay, we invite all NATO members, but not Turkey. You do not expel them. You just do not include them in the process. I'm not I'm not a specialist in law, and so I cannot tell you 100% what could be done on this issue. But NATO could suspend Turkey's membership with this kind of measures. There are legal complexities involved in any kind of suspension, but it would be possible. And this could, influence, this could cause some changes in Turkey's foreign policy. It could change its foreign policy, because Erdogan is trying to play both sides, but he's a realist. He's able to completely change his position He's amoralist. He doesn't care. He will find an excuse. He will say, okay, we got what we wanted from the US. We got what we wanted from Sweden. And I think this will happen, but after the elections. After May, Erdogan will accept Sweden and Finland, and he will try to say something like, okay, we got 10 Kurdish political activists. That's good for us. And perhaps he will stage some kind of theatrical show in Turkey with some sort of trial, like they did with PKK leader back in the late 1990s. And Öcalan, with Öcalan, they took him to Turkey and they staged a whole theatrics. And I think it will go something like this, but after May. But so far, until then, we don't know how the war in Ukraine will go. It's all, it's all fluid.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why both the US and Turkey trying to buy some time. Turkey, of course, the US is the strong part in this equation. It can pressure Turkey, not only with not allowing the F-16s, but also with financial pressure. The US can exert considerable pressure on Turkish economy. And it has done it so far, but it could also increase it.
Meanwhile, there are two issues that have been very much under the radar, even though they're central to this whole situation, which is, and you touched on them, the energy issue and the sanctions circumvention. Starting with the sanctions, one of the issues that US has made a big deal on in public, but has not actually pursued very consistently, which is the attempt by Russia to undermine the dollar on the one hand and circumvent the limits on the oil price the oil price caps by requiring the purchasers to trade in ruble rather than in dollar, and to accept ruble as a currency, and so on and so forth. And a number of Turkish banks have agreed to that arrangements, and we haven't heard much from the US or from others regarding that. Could you tell us a little bit about this? How is this happening? We already know that Turkey has circumvented Iranian sanctions in the past through oil for gold arrangements, but now we're seeing the same kind of situation with Russia, with this ruble circumstance and Russia's efforts to undermine the dollar in general. What can be said about this?
Yes, this is a main objective of what I would like to call Eurasian authoritarian powers. These are Russia, China, Iran, and Turkey, to varying degrees. These four states have some common elements. They are authoritarian nature. They are imperial or post-imperial in their history. It's interesting. I'm a historian, as I told you, so I like to see this historic continuity. These all have been empires in the past, so they still perceive themselves as empires. We have to understand that in relation to Turkey. Turkey does not see itself as a typical nation state. It has more ambitions, and the same goes for Iran, which tries to project power in the Middle East with various groups. The same goes for China, and the same goes, of course, for Russia. So all this Eurasian autarkic states want to supplement, want to change they want to substitute the predominant position of the dollar and the US economy worldwide. So the main engine of this system, of course, is China, with its rising economic power. China is currently the second economy in the world. There are projections that it could, surpass the US, but I don't think that's the case. Russian economy is very weak. Russian economy, to keep this context, is equal to the economy of the Netherlands and Belgium. It's smaller. It's smaller than the economy of Italy or Spain. It's almost like Spain. It's smaller than the economy of Italy, and it's equivalent to the economy of Belgium and Netherlands. This is impressively, negative for Russia, because it's such a huge country with a potential, but it does not have this. It does not have the technology or the expertise, and even the war has produced a negative result for Russian economy, because a lot of people with a lot of human capital has fled the country. People who are experts in artificial intelligence or in computers, younger people, they were afraid that they would get drafted for the war, and hundreds of thousands of them have fled already Russia, and this is a loss in human capital. And of course, there is still emigration from Russia due to the situation there. So Russia has primary military power, but as you mentioned, there is this effort to undermine dollar, and to connect, let's say, the economies to either the yuan, the Chinese currency, or the ruble, the Russian one. Turkey has done this, as you mentioned, with Iran. It has helped Iran evade sanctions with with the close cooperation of their banking system, and with many deals, either openly, publicly, or undercover. Many deals to export oil to to evade sanctions. They help Iran evade Western and especially US sanctions, and they help Russia now do the same. I think this effort to substitute the dollar is too ambitious, and it won't succeed, because globally, we have to understand that there are some major financial, let's say, centers in the world. These are North America, the US, and Canada. So you have this great power and economic bloc. You have Europe. You have the East Asia complex, which would be like South Korea and Japan, and you have China. These are the four steam engines of the world economy, and you have a fifth one emerging, let's say, India. But still, India has not risen up to its true potential, both on a financial or military level. But the world economy is based still on these four great power centers: North America, Europe, Japan, Korea, and China. So you could say that the West, if we define it on a geopolitical level, controls 3 out of 4 power economic centers of the world. And this is why the West still controls world economy, because the US controls sea lanes, sea routes, and this is essential in geopolitics. Why is it essential that the US controls this? Because international trade is relies on sea routes. You have to export all these products. They are transported by sea lanes, not by land, because land routes are more expensive. So even China exports its products towards the EU by sea, through the Malacca Strait in Singapore and through the Suez Canal. So this this takes us back to geopolitics. This is why the US controlling the seas essentially has an advantage over Russia, which is kind of a land power that has not the ability to project power on the seas. Russia has only one aircraft carrier, and the Kuznetsov, and it's rather old and antiquated. It's like non-existent. So still, international system militarily and economically is controlled by the West and its allies. So this attempt that you hinted at about to substitute the dollar, I think it will not succeed, because this great powerhouse, European Union, is actually in alignment with the US geopolitically and financially. Of course, the European Union has displayed tendencies of independence, let's say, from the US in the past, both on a geopolitical and a financial level. Europeans, especially Germans and the French, would like to see. They would like to be the French. They have illusions of sometimes of of grandeur of their past, of the historical past, and they would like to be more independent from the US. But as the war in Ukraine has showed us, when things get really tough, all the states, fell in line. Even Germany more than France, was in a close cooperation with Russia. We should mention this because, okay, we're talking about Turkey and it really has a problematic attitude, but Germany also had established already since the 1970s, late 1970s, with Willy Brandt, a close cooperation with Russia, with the Soviet Union then, importing gas. And Germany, of course, is the industrial steam engine of the EU. But it was, until recently, really dependent on natural gas and oil from Russia. And this was a great problem. You had this Nord Stream gas pipeline. And this is why you see Germany being so reluctant to aid Ukraine so far. And, just today, Chancellor Scholz announced that he would send some battle tanks to Ukraine. Germany will send finally 14. They announced 14 battle tanks, Leopard 2. These are highly advanced battle tanks. They rank, along with the US Abrams, among the best in the world. And this is really a game changer for the war in Ukraine, because Ukraine needs offensive weapons to not only to hold their lines against the numerically superior, but not technologically superior Russian army, but also to perhaps go on the counteroffensive and liberate their occupied areas. They need tanks, of course. They need airplanes. So far, the Western states have helped Ukraine, but they have limited their help in, let's say, defensive weapons, anti-aircraft or radar. They were not willing to give tanks. But just today, Germany announced that it will send Leopard tanks, and that it will allow to other countries to export them, because there is this clause that when Germany exports its Leopard tanks to other countries like Poland or Greece or whichever country, if Poland wants to send these tanks to Ukraine, it needs German permission. It's a kind of clause to protect German interests. So you have this change of policy by Germany. But I repeat that until the invasion, Germany and France were in good relations with Russia, and they didn't expect full-scale Russian invasion. It's interesting that before the invasion, on an intelligence level, let's say, only the US and states like Estonia, it's impressive, were right to warn that an invasion was imminent. You remember, you had US officials saying, next week Russia shall invade. And I remember some political commentators in Greece or in Europe, general, saying, oh yeah, right, let's they didn't believe it, and they were like, okay, we shall hear it once more. But it did happen, because this time the US intelligence agencies were successful, in contrast, let's say, to Iraq. And this time the US adopted a different strategy. It put out everything in the open. We're living, in a social media era, and the US actually did something very clever. It revealed the threat. It said that Russia is going to invade. We're not lying, and here are the satellite images to prove it. So it was kind of trick by the US to stop Russia, to say, okay, your plans are now revealed globally. But of course, it didn't stop Russia because Russia overestimated its power and underestimated the will of Ukrainians to defend their homeland. And this is also an interesting discussion, how Russia saw, the invasion in Ukraine, how it saw Ukrainians, because there's a lot of history here and a lot of propaganda by the Russian side. We could go also into that if you would like. So to conclude my answer to your question, I don't think that this, let's say, this geopolitical bloc, which is not formed, it's informal, China, Russia, China providing the financial means, Russia being the military arm, and Turkey often cooperating, or Iran has the ability to substitute the dollar, or because as I told you, the decisive factor is how the European Union behaves, and right now the European Union is aligned with the US, so the euro is aligned with dollar. It will not align itself with the ruble or the yuan. So far, let's define it as the West, the Euro-Atlantic nexus has clearly the upper hand.
I do want to touch on what you just said, which is the issue of this propaganda and this historical manufacturing and by the Russians. The reason being because despite the fact that it's utterly false, it remains relevant in terms of public opinion, in terms of penetration of the Russian propaganda into the international media, into various political parties and fora, and hijacking of the discussion, and creating this nonsensical perception that it has claims or geopolitical reasons that are in any way justifiable, and that basically the end of it is that it's an internal matter, and therefore other countries should stay out of it and it doesn't concern them. That's basically the bottom line of all of this historical fairy tale building. But what can you tell us about this manipulative process and how Russia has taken advantage of the international ignorance of these issues?
About the war in Ukraine, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, the Russian offensive against Ukraine was based on a series of assumptions, both historical and geopolitical. Let's say, first on a geopolitical level, to clarify that, Russians did not expect any serious resistance from Ukraine. They thought that they would take Kyiv in 3 days, that the government would collapse, and that if the government collapsed, then the army would surrender its arms. These assumptions were based on false intelligence provided by the military intelligence. And it has also to do with the authoritarian nature of the regime. What do I mean? Because these military persons that provided the information from inside Ukraine did not dare to say, to the leadership, the military leadership, or to Putin, that Ukrainians will not welcome us as we think. I think that the Russians genuinely thought that a part of the Ukrainian population, especially some people in eastern Ukraine that are Russian speaking, and we have to clarify this to our viewers, that a lot of people in Ukraine are historically Russian speaking, but that does not make them pro-Russian, because in Ukraine, Russian language during the Soviet period was imposed. It was, let's say, the language of the regime or of culture, and Ukrainian language, especially in eastern Ukraine, was persecuted. So a lot of Ukrainians are either bilingual and fluent in both Ukrainian and Russian, and the fact that there were Russian-speaking Ukrainians, I repeat, so we should not confuse them with Russians, produced a false image to Russian leadership that these people would welcome the invasion. This did not happen. You had Russian-speaking regions like Kharkiv and Mariupol producing fierce resistance against the invaders. And if there were any sympathies, if there was, let's say, a current inside Ukraine before the invasion that was more amicable towards Russia, this disappeared completely with invasion, with a brutal invasion. You had people who perhaps thought that Ukraine should align itself, let's say, with Russia. They changed views because you had a brutal invasion, you had their relatives being killed. This now, on a historical level, Russia promotes this image of the tripartite Russian nation, of Russia comprising, let's say, an uber nation that is composed of the Russians themselves, who are called in this context Great Russians, the Belarusians, or White Russians, and the Ukrainians, who are in this context called Little Russians. This is a term that was used pejoratively by Russian propaganda already since the 19th century and even back. They tried to impose a kind of identity on Ukrainians that they were part of a greater unity that is, let's say, pan-Russian, to distinguish it from the ethnic Russian, and that they are part of this Eastern Slavic family, and that they should belong there. This was promoted even by the Tsarist Russian Empire in the 19th century. They forbade the Ukrainian language. During the census, the first census of the Russian Empire in the early 20th century, they had languages, which languages are spoken in the Russian Empire. Back then, Ukraine was part of the Russian Empire. So they said Russian is like 60% of the people, let's say. They didn't say Ukrainian, they said Little Russian is spoken by 25% of the people. So they use these terms to try to erase the Ukrainian national identity. Of course, this did not succeed, because Ukrainian national identity, as you know well better than me, is based on history, on centuries of distinct ethnic identity. It's based on its contacts with Western Europe through Ruthenia and Galicia. It's based on its separate language, its separate customs, its distinct history from Russia. So Russian propaganda has tried to use this image of restoring, let's say, an ancestral Slavic unity. There are some indications that what Russia planned after the invasion, if it succeeded, was to establish a kind of state union composed of three, something like confederate states. It would include Russia proper, Belarus, and Ukraine. It would be kind of like a confederacy. There was this article that was later interestingly retracted after the invasion. It got leaked in Russian media, and it says that now it was published 1 or 2 days after the invasion, so the Russians expected a swift victory. And it said that now we have won, and we impose this new confederacy of Russians, Belarusians, and Ukrainians, who are all part of this great pan-Russian nation. So their plan was to absorb totally Ukraine. They would abolish Ukrainian independence. They would and they would present this on two levels: on an ethnic, let's say, national level that is addressed to the nationalist part of Russian society. They would say, okay, we have a sort of Tsarist Slavic empire based on three peoples, but who are one family. And to those nostalgic of the Soviet regime, because the older generation in Russia is nostalgic to a great degree of Soviet times and of the power that Russia, Soviet Union enjoyed back then. They would present this as kind of a return of let's say, a mini USSR, a shortened form of the Soviet Union, because historically the very factor that brought the final end of the Soviet Union was Ukraine. It's interesting because, okay, first you had the Baltics, the three Baltic states, leaving the Soviet Union. But before the communist coup in August 1991, there were thoughts in Russia. The Soviet Union back then still had not dissolved. There were thoughts that they could keep the Soviet Union without the Baltics, but with Ukraine, with Belarus, and let's keep this as a new Soviet Union. But when Ukraine said that no, we shall declare independence, full independence, this was the end of this plan to keep the Soviet Union. So in a way, Ukraine is essential in bringing down Soviet Union because Zbigniew Brzezinski, this analyst, has rightly said back in 1997 in his very interesting book, The Grand Chessboard, that without Ukraine, Russia is only a state. It cannot be an empire. With Ukraine, it can pose as an empire because Ukraine is the greatest country territorially in Europe. It has a very huge territory, and this, of course, was not taken into account by Russia when it invaded. It has a great population, exceeding 40 million, and it's essential in Russian self-perception of security. Russia thought really that it would occupy easily Ukraine and control Ukraine, but of course Ukrainian people proved that this was not the case. They had this heroic resistance that I have to say amazed everybody in the fact that I believe that all analysts, everybody expected that, okay, Russia would win because, and I have to say this, all analysts, including myself and everybody, we overestimated Russian military capabilities because for all these decades and years, Russia was playing a very clever propaganda game. It's promoted this image of a very modern army, an effective army. But the invasion has proved that the Russian army has real problems in logistics. Their logistics were tragic. You remember these images of showing this 40 kilometers long array of cars and of vehicles, military vehicles. They were heading to Kiev, and you had a 40 kilometers long line because they were not, in coordination, and they had clear problems, and this is why the invasion failed. They lost. They were defeated at the Battle of Kiev. They could not occupy Kiev. They were defeated at the Battle of Kharkiv, where the Ukrainians then made a successful counteroffensive, and they were defeated in the Battle of Kherson. They occupied Kherson for some months, but they were forced to abandon Kherson in December. So the Russian army is not this formidable army that we thought it was. It has real problems, and these problems are connected to the fact that its technological level is not so advanced like NATO armies. The other problem is that it's based on this authoritarian, outdated structure. It relies on, orders from above, from the generals, while NATO armies have this principle of flexibility of small units making their own decisions to adapt to the battle landscape. So, you have a captain or a colonel. He does not wait for orders. He gives his own orders so his unit can escape a dangerous situation. This is not the case with Russia. You have generals deciding everything, and also being on the front line. This is why you have a lot of generals, Russian generals, being killed, because they go on the front line. It's the old Soviet style of conducting war, very straight line, very from the top to to the bottom, and it's outdated. And right now, Russia is trying to change this. It's trying to adapt to the military landscape in Ukraine. It has made some changes, but still it cannot move decisively to occupy the part that it wishes to occupy. And it's indicative that initially Russia said our goal is to overthrow the Zelensky government, to impose a pro-Russian regime, to, of course, they use this propaganda trope of denazify Ukraine, which is totally unacceptable. This is real. This is the Russian perception of World War II. Russia is trapped in its World War II image as an anti-Nazi, anti-fascist power, and they constantly promote this, and they try to instrumentalize these notions, and whoever they do not like, they describe as a Nazi regime or as a fascist regime. This was typical Soviet, jargon back in the Cold War, and Russia still uses this kind of propaganda. It has tried to portray Ukraine as an extremist regime. Of course, this has failed to Western audiences. And then this is why they changed their rhetoric afterwards. They say, okay, now we do not want to overthrow the regime. We just want to take Donbass. Donbass, for our viewers, is this industrial heartland in eastern Ukraine. A part of it is occupied by Russia since 2014. To give some of the historic context for our viewers, in 2014, there was this popular uprising in Ukraine because then the government tried to align Ukraine with Russia. It went back on its promise to align Ukraine with the European Union, and instead it tried to align itself with Russia. So it rejected a great agreement that was to be signed with the EU. So the people took to the streets with protests, and finally the government was, had to back down, and then President Yanukovych had to flee to Russia. So in response to this decisive, uprising of the Ukrainian people and their willingness to align themselves with the West, Russia invaded both Crimea, this peninsula that is part of Ukraine, with commandos, not with military uniforms, but they posed as civilians. And the eastern part, you had separatists, pro-Russian separatists, who were typically Ukrainian citizens, but who were, of course, pro-Russian. They had this successful secession of this Donbas region up until, but not including Mariupol. So these two parts of Ukraine are occupied by Russia directly, I mean Crimea, or indirectly, the Donbas, since 2014. So yes, I think this is the propaganda that Russia uses against Ukraine, that, Ukrainians are not a real people on a historical level, but they are something sort of, let's say, deluded Russians who do not know their own historic identity. Secondly, that Ukraine, the second propaganda subject issue was that NATO would use Ukraine to attack Russia. Of course, NATO had no plans to attack Russia. It didn't have any troops east of Germany up until the invasion. NATO avoided to station troops east of Germany in the Baltic states or in Poland. They only did exercises exactly because they did not want to, to give excuses to Russia. Of course, this has all changed after the invasion. Now NATO has sent its troops to border regions like Romania, like the Baltic states, that lie under threat, and we have this great issue whether Sweden and Finland will join. So in essence, the invasion was a strategic blunder on part of the Russia, because it underestimated the will of Ukrainians to live as a free, independent nation. It caused the reverse effect from what Russia wanted. I mean, it's caused Sweden and Finland wanting to join NATO. So it caused an expansion of NATO. Russia went into war and saying we wish to stop the expansion of NATO, but it produced quite the opposite result. So it's a total strategic failure on part of Putin.
Now, besides this myth making that they were mass producing and spreading everywhere, there were also concrete geopolitical reasons such as energy control and the attempt to blackmail Europe through energy and to consolidate this territorial grab within very strategic regions of Ukraine. And now we're seeing that Russia is pivoting, seeing that in the long term this is likely not going to pan out because the war in Ukraine will be lost sooner or later. They're pivoting towards a cooperative strategy with Turkey besides the civilian nuclear reactors, or civilian for now at least. But there are also other energy projects in the works. Allegedly, there's been talk about pipelines. And can you tell us a little bit about more about those pipelines and other energy projects and how that would affect the Mediterranean region?
This is a very interesting question. The energy cooperation between Russia and Turkey has been underway for the last 10 years or less. In 2016, you had this Turk Stream. This is a pipeline connecting the Krasnodar region. This is the region in North Caucasus to the east of Crimea for our viewers, let's say, and it transports Russian oil and natural gas towards the European part of Turkey to the west of Istanbul, and from there to European markets. So you have this Turk Stream, and there were plans, of course, for other also pipelines, but they were not successful. Russia had this ambition, especially now after the invasion, of course. It wanted to evade, let's say, the sanctions or the pressure from the EU by turning Turkey into an energy hub for its exports towards the West or the Mediterranean or the Arab states, because since the war started, Turkey's imports of Russian crude oil and coal, they have climbed sharply, and both Erdogan and Putin, they have talked often about how they can turn Turkey into a regional trading center for Russian gas. So, as you mentioned, we have these nuclear power plants. They already have one. Now they're talking about building a second one that is designed and financed by Russia. It's Russian technology. And for Turkey, this is essential because this cheaper energy is helping to keep Turkey's economy that had serious problems afloat at a critical time with the COVID-19 situation and the general, international turmoil. But this is not just financial. This is also a part of a great ambition of Turkey, and especially the Erdogan regime. They want to use this energy crisis and turn Turkey into a major energy hub. It's part of this new perception of Turkey as being, let's say, a focal point between the West and between Asia, the rest of Asia. And this effort of Turkey has had some success, I have to say, because the embargo by the European Union on seaborne Russian crude oil had the effect that Turkey took advantage of its geographical position, and you had oil tankers making their way through the Bosporus and up to going into the Mediterranean Sea. and Turkey has made some money from this because they want more proof of insurance. So they say that the price cap has increased because the risks due to the war increase. So it's all a game, a financial game between Russia and Turkey. And the problem, of course, for Russia is that they sell now they export their gas at much lower prices, uh, even to China or to Turkey. But still, they get some results with this. So we have Turkey taking advantage of its focal geographical position on the juncture between Europe and Asia, and mainly by controlling the Bosporus Straits, and playing this very dangerous game. But essentially, Turkey wants to become a regional trading center, and Russia is willing to help Turkey in its ambition, and says they had met. They have this mechanism of meeting often, Erdogan and Putin, and they have talked extensively about importing LNG, liquefied natural gas from Russia through Turkey, and the main issue being that if the European Union is blocking Russian imports, then we shall go, the Russians say, through Turkey. This is an attempt of Turkey and Russia in progress to bypass, let's say, the Western sanctions and the control of the pipelines that are going through Europe, and to bypass them through the southern route, this Turk Stream, through the Black Sea. But the volume of natural gas or oil that can be transported through these routes is limited. This is the problem for Russia. They cannot substitute totally the imports that their exports towards that they were doing through the Nord Stream, for example. So it's a limited. It will have limited success. And to answer the other part of your question, now Europe is. About the Mediterranean, the consequences of the Mediterranean. Now Europe is seeking alternative energy providers. And you have states like Egypt rising up to the challenge. Egypt has discovered important natural gas deposits offshore. They have this huge Zohr field, and they also export not only natural gas but also energy, electric energy. They have solar energy, and they turn this, due to the climate and their flat surfaces. They have in the desert, they use these huge energy collectors for solar energy, and they then transform this to electric energy and export it to Europe. And you have this great cooperation between Egypt and Greece, because Greece is the closest lying state to Egypt, to export solar energy and electric energy and even natural gas through Egypt towards energy-hungry European Union. You have also other states like Algeria, but Algeria has not an adequate infrastructure. It's kind of old and unreliable, but still it provides something like 4 to 5% or even more of EU energy needs. You have Norway, which is a great energy supplier. You have the United Kingdom also increasing its production. So, and of course you have US LNG. This is of course more expensive because they have to ship LNG from the US to Europe, and then they have to turn this, it's liquefied, so they have to turn this again into gas. So this is a more expensive procedure. But I think that gradually the EU will adopt all these alternative, let's say, sources. The US, the Arab states, Norway, and there are some other cases like Azerbaijan, which of course is also problematic because it's also an authoritarian state, has displayed aggression against Armenia, but the EU keeps a balance. It's a more realist, let's say, approach because they want to diversify their energy imports, so they do not go harsh on Azerbaijan. But this is, of course, a work in other states too, like Cyprus has discovered a huge natural gas field offshore, and Greece is now attempting to it's cooperating with ExxonMobil, U.S. Major company, to drill for natural gas and oil offshore Crete. So you have all states, abandoning some, let's say, naive perceptions of even ecological, worries. Now we are in an age when all states have to discover their huge potential. So especially Europeans are sometimes trapped in ideological fixations. For example, Germans who are in industrial powerhouse are against nuclear energy, and so they cannot produce energy up to their potential. So they are reliant on Russia. It's all a great geopolitical game where you have, of course, to keep balance with other worries, with safety about nuclear power, but you have also to be energy independent and to rely on alternative sources like solar energy or wind energy, especially in states like the Mediterranean ones. Or Turkey, as you mentioned, is now building its second nuclear power plant. Greece is trying to drill for oil and gas, and this is an issue of contention, of dispute with Turkey, because Turkey says, as I told you earlier, that it will not allow Greece or Cyprus to go on with its exploration activities, because power in international relations is relative. When you have neighboring states, when a state grows stronger, and especially if they're not on good terms, like Greece and Turkey, the other state perceives this strengthening as a threat. So they do not want, Greece or Cyprus to become energy independent. They want to keep them weaker. So we have a really complicated landscape in the Mediterranean, and perhaps we could have another discussion sometime about the Mediterranean in particular, and perhaps along with our great common friend Hani Farogoraba, and to produce an analysis of how this region has grown in importance due to the war in Ukraine, because it's now, we perceive the Mediterranean or the Middle East in general as a source of instability, of conflict, with all the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or with Turkey's role in Syria and Iraq. But it's also a region that will become a focal point of geopolitics in the future. I mean, on a global level, we have some points, some areas in the planet that are focal for geopolitics. These are East Asia, Korea, Japan, China, the South China Sea, India, Pakistan, because there is this threat of nuclear war, the Mediterranean now. Other areas are not so focally important, like let's say the Caribbean, or the sea of coast of Nigeria. There are points because there are many states in the Mediterranean, many competing states with competing interests. This is the case also in South China Sea, which is a hotbed, or in East Asia. And these are areas that will always be, on the forefront of international discussions and analysis. And, we can come back later at another podcast of your very interesting, program that you host, and we can discuss all this.
For sure, I already have actually in mind the next big question, which is the future, given Turkey's aspirations to become this Mediterranean focal point, and given the fact that Egypt has created its own Mediterranean gas forum and has in fact invited Turkey to join, which has not really happen? What will be the future of these two potentially competing groups of interest? And what impact it's going to have on the global energy interest?
This is a
And
very interesting
footprint?
question. You are referring, for our viewers to clarify, to the East Med Gas Forum. This was established in 2020 on the initiative, as you said, of Egypt, and it has as member states Greece, Cyprus, Egypt, France, interestingly, Jordan, the Palestinian Authority. The Egyptians included also the Palestinians, and these states. So these states cooperate, and they try to create, let's say, a platform, a diplomatic and energy security cooperation framework that will help develop the Eastern Mediterranean into a regional focal point of energy. Interestingly enough, also the US and the European Union are observer states, or observer entities. And as you mentioned, Turkey is not a member because it was not invited. So it is perceived as a kind of rival by all the members of the East Med Gas Forum, which is located in Cairo. And this is interesting because it means that Turkey is still isolated on a diplomatic level in the Mediterranean. We have this expanding diplomatic alliance between Greece and Egypt. Egypt, of course, is a rising power. It has a population, it has exceeded 100 million. It has the 10th strongest army in the world. In comparison, Turkish is 13, and Greek army is, let's say, 26th. So you have Egypt. Of course, it has its own internal problems like overpopulation, conflict with Ethiopia over the waters of the Nile. But you have this nexus of states aligning and helping each other. This is there are overlapping, let's say, networks, diplomatic networks. You have Greece, Cyprus. Of course, these are two states that are like brotherly states, because Cyprus, for our viewers, I have to clarify, it's a state with an ethnic Greek population, the free part in the south. So these states are, it's like two Greek states. Anyway, you've got Greek, Cyprus, Israel working together. You've got Greece, Cyprus, Egypt. You also have Egypt, Israel working together on energy exports. The Israelis have also discovered natural gas deposits in their territorial waters, and they shall export it towards Europe through Egypt, because the Egyptians have these great facilities in Edku and Damietta. They are for LNG. They are used to export LNG. So both Cyprus and Israel shall send their natural gas towards to European Union markets through Egypt. So you have this cooperation of states. And you have this kind of balance between Turkey and Israel. They had this tension since 2010. You remember this Mavi Marmara incident when Israeli commandos raided this ship, this Turkish ship that was heading towards Gaza. Relations have been not so good between these two states. There was an attempt of amelioration only this year, only 2022 in August. But still, it's doubtful whether Turkey and Israel shall be again close as they did in the past. They were really close in the late 1990s and early 2000s. But this changed with Erdogan, because he has this, let's say, pro-Islamist they have affiliation. He supports Hamas, which is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. The AKP regime, the AKP is the party of Erdogan, is also affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a notorious terrorist organization. It's actually the mother organization of Al Qaeda and ISIS. It was founded back in 1928. It's almost 100 years old, and it's deemed terrorist in Egypt. It's forbidden, and Turkey was supporting this organization. It still harbors many of its members in Istanbul. One of its branches is still in Istanbul. So you have this relation in the Mediterranean where you have a kind of coalition between Greece and Egypt and Greece and Israel against Turkey. Turkey is isolated. Of course, they have an ally, which is Libya, but Libya is divided between the Tripoli government in Western Libya, which is pro-Turkish, and Eastern Libya, which is, let's say, on good relations with Egypt and Greece and Russia too. It's a strange, the geopolitical situation in Libya is very complicated. But the main outline is that the western part, which controls de facto the government, is pro-Turkish. They rely very heavily on Turkey because they were saved as a regime by Turkish military intervention. So they are dependent. But the curious fact is that they use this relation with Turkey. Turkey uses this relation for totally absurd claims, like they want to draw an EEZ, an exclusive economic zone between Turkey and Libya. Yes, but in the middle, there is this island called Crete, which is part of Greece. So you cannot, override it. It exists, it's there. So the Turks, they projected the line. They say, okay, we have common EEZ with Libya. If you look them up, it's totally absurd. But there's also this game of exclusive economic zones in the Mediterranean. Many states have signed between bilateral agreements. For example, Cyprus has signed, they have demarcated their exclusive economic zones. Why is this essential? Because if you organize your exclusive economic zone, you demarcate it, then you can proceed with exploration for natural gas and oil. You have every right to do so. It's not a gray zone. Another neighboring state will not come and say, this is my region. So this is essential to demarcate this region. Cyprus has done this with Egypt and Israel. Egypt has done this with Greece. Greece and Turkey will never agree on this because Turkey is maximalist and does not accept the right of Greece to do that. So you have this very complex situation in the Mediterranean. Mediterranean is a closed sea, that's the problem. So you have overlapping claims of exclusive economic zones. Libya is a great enigma in the past, what will happen. And we shall see how the civil war there, which is now in a stable condition, will unfold. Libya does not have a political experience of, or the structure, the political structure, or the political powers they're not mature enough to push the country forward into a real republic. So there are many tribal elements. It's a state divided along ancestral tribal divisions. There are tribes in the south. There are people in eastern Libya that do not like the ones in western Libya. It's a more primordial their situation, pre-state. Anyway, the whole situation in the Mediterranean is very interesting to analyze, and we could do that on another occasion because there are many actors involved. You have Israel, you have Turkey, you have Greece, you have Egypt, you have unstable Libya, you have France, which also wants to project its power there. You have Italy. You have the US, which has, left the region because Israel is strong enough to defend itself now, does not need the US presence, but still it has interests, of course. It wants stability in the Mediterranean. You have Russian influence in Libya, you have Russian influence in Syria with the cooperation of Turkey. It's a really complex situation, and we could do, a discussion where we could present each country and for our viewers, and to present what's at stake at its distinct case. But overall, as a general comment, I would like to say that the Mediterranean will be a focal geopolitical space in the near future, and we shall hear a lot about it. And it is essential for US policy makers and decision makers in Washington to know about this region. And you contribute towards this direction with your fabulous program here.
Thank you so much for your comments, and for sure stay tuned, because I will be organizing a panel on this issue in the near future. Energy is actually one of my professional specialties, so of course anything related to that is very much of interest to me. And thank you so much for your comments that shed a great deal of light on these complicated issues that for various reasons just don't make the front pages, even though they should. And for everyone watching us, this was the Washington Outsider Report with Dr. Ioannis Kotoulas, and we'll be back next week, same time, Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Thank you so much for joining and for watching. Please come back soon.